Motivation feels like a personal choice, a sudden surge of willpower that pushes someone to act, or a mysterious absence that leaves them frozen despite knowing what must be done. But beneath that feeling lies a quiet biological force deciding what matters, what pulls attention forward, and what feels worth the effort. That force is dopamine. Not pleasure, not happiness, but desire itself. Dopamine is the signal that tells the brain, this is important, this is worth chasing, this matters for the future. It is the chemical lens through which goals gain weight and direction. At its core, dopamine is a neuromodulator released from deep midbrain systems that shapes motivation by linking action to expectation. It does not reward us for success. Instead, it fuels the pursuit of success by encoding anticipation. The brain releases dopamine most strongly not when a reward is achieved, but when a cue predicts that a reward might be possible. This is why motivation lives in the space between effort and outcome, and why goals lose their pull the moment the brain stops believing that effort will lead somewhere meaningful. Dopamine teaches the brain through prediction, comparing what was expected with what actually happened, and then adjusts future motivation accordingly. When expectations are met or exceeded, motivation strengthens. When they are repeatedly violated, drive collapses. This system explains why motivation is not steady or rational. Dopamine does not respond to importance alone. It responds to perceived payoff. A task can be deeply valuable, yet feel impossible to start if the dopamine system predicts low reward or delayed returns. Over time, dopamine strengthens neural pathways that link effort with success, making motivation feel natural and automatic. But when those pathways weaken, even simple actions feel heavy, not because of laziness, but because the brain is no longer assigning sufficient value to the outcome. The disruption of dopamine-driven motivation has clear roots. Chronic stress, poor sleep, and prolonged mental exhaustion reduce dopamine signaling and blunt receptor sensitivity, making effort feel disproportionately costly. At the same time, environments overloaded with instant, high-intensity rewards train the brain to expect constant stimulation. Fast novelty floods dopamine circuits with short-term prediction signals, teaching the brain to prioritize immediacy over persistence. Slowly, sustained goals lose their motivational gravity. The result is not a lack of ambition, but a miscalibrated dopamine system, one that has learned to chase stimulation instead of meaning, urgency instead of purpose, and immediacy instead of long-term reward. Restoring motivation is not about forcing discipline onto a broken system. It is about reshaping the conditions under which dopamine learns what is worth pursuing. The solution begins with understanding that dopamine responds to patterns, not intentions. Motivation strengthens when the brain repeatedly experiences a reliable link between effort and meaningful progress. Small, strategically chosen challenges rebuild this link by giving the dopamine system frequent evidence that action leads somewhere real. When effort consistently produces even modest forward movement, dopamine signaling stabilizes, and motivation begins to rise organically rather than through pressure. Equally important is the regulation of reward intensity. A brain constantly exposed to rapid, high-stimulation rewards becomes desensitized to slower forms of satisfaction. Reducing overstimulation is not deprivation, it is recalibration. When novelty and instant gratification are moderated, the dopamine system regains sensitivity, allowing delayed goals to regain motivational weight. This is why environments matter more than willpower. Structuring surroundings to reduce friction for meaningful work and increase friction for impulsive rewards quietly trains dopamine to shift its priorities without conscious struggle. Another powerful solution lies in redefining how progress is perceived. Dopamine does not require completion. It responds to prediction updates. Breaking long-term goals into visible milestones gives the brain repeated signals of success, reinforcing motivation even before the final outcome is reached. This transforms effort from a draining investment into an unfolding narrative of progress. Over time, the brain learns to associate persistence itself with reward, strengthening motivational circuits at a structural level. Physiological foundations also play a critical role. Sleep quality, physical movement, and metabolic stability directly influence dopamine synthesis and receptor responsiveness. Consistent sleep restores the brain's capacity to generate motivational signals. Physical activity increases dopamine release and receptor sensitivity, making effort feel more energizing rather than depleting. Nutrition that supports stable blood glucose prevents motivational crashes that the brain interprets as low reward potential. These are not lifestyle accessories. They are biological prerequisites for sustained motivation. Finally, meaning acts as dopamine's amplifier. Goals connected to identity, values, or long-term purpose generate stronger and more durable motivational signals than externally imposed demands. When actions are framed as expressions of who someone is becoming, rather than tasks to be endured, dopamine aligns effort with self-relevance. The most effective recommendation, therefore, is not to chase motivation directly, but to build systems, environments, and narratives that continuously teach the brain one lesson. Effort pays off, progress is real, and the future is worth moving toward. When dopamine-driven motivation is balanced, its effects are subtle but powerful. Focus sharpens, effort feels purposeful, and progress compounds over time. But when this system is chronically dysregulated, the consequences spread far beyond productivity. Short-term effects appear as apathy, procrastination, mental fatigue, and a persistent sense of being stuck despite clear goals. Tasks that once felt meaningful begin to feel hollow, not because their value has changed, but because the brain no longer predicts sufficient reward. Over time, this disconnect erodes confidence, reinforces avoidance, and trains the mind to associate effort with frustration rather than growth. The long-term effects are more profound. Prolonged dopamine imbalance reshapes behavior and identity, pushing individuals toward compulsive reward-seeking or emotional numbness. Learning slows, perseverance weakens, and ambition quietly shrinks to fit what feels immediately achievable. In extreme cases, this pattern contributes to burnout, addictive behaviors, and depressive symptoms as the brain struggles to generate motivation for goals that require sustained investment. What begins as a neurochemical adjustment gradually becomes a psychological narrative. I can't stick with things. I lack discipline, or something is wrong with me. These beliefs are not causes, but consequences of a system that has learned to undervalue long-term effort. Prevention begins with protecting dopamine's learning role before dysfunction takes hold. Consistency is more powerful than intensity. Regular routines that pair effort with visible progress keep motivational circuits calibrated over time. Managing stimulation load by limiting constant novelty and preserving periods of deep, undistracted focus prevents desensitization and maintains sensitivity to delayed rewards. Equally critical is recovery. Sleep, rest, and psychological downtime are not indulgences. They reset the brain's reward predictions and prevent motivational exhaustion. Prevention also depends on narrative control. When goals are framed as experiments rather than tests of self-worth, dopamine remains responsive even in the face of failure. This reduces the motivational damage of setbacks and preserves the brain's willingness to try again. Ultimately, sustaining motivation is not about chasing dopamine highs, but about maintaining a system that learns correctly over time. When effort, meaning, and recovery stay aligned, dopamine continues to do what it evolved to do best. Pull behavior forward, one purposeful step at a time.